You may be seated.
The court will now hear the IMT v. Durnitz case, beginning with a statement from the prosecution, followed by remarks from the defense team, including a statement from Mr. Durnitz himself.
We will now hear prosecution's opening statement. Please approach the stand.
Before I start my speech, I want to ask the court to reallocate 90 seconds from my closing statement to the speech for additional time.
Granted.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. I stand before you today to argue why defendant Carl Durnitz is guilty of conspiracy, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Carl Durnitz violated numerous international treaties by murdering prisoners of war, leading occupations of enemy countries, and leading his soldiers to preventable death. His powerful positions include the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, leader of the Undersea Boot Program, also known as the U-Boat Program, and the head of Germany after Hitler's death. His key positions made him a major figure in Germany. Throughout this speech, I want everybody to keep in mind that Durnitz was not only fighting for his country, but for the Nazi Party. As chief of the Navy, he decided to use his power to force officers to follow the Nazi Party. In a Hitler Youth meeting, Durnitz, quote, emphasized the close ties between the armed forces and the National Socialist Movement, 2878 PS. Here, Durnitz admits that the armed forces were in constant contact with the Nazi organization. This indicates that the army was not only fighting for their country, but for the National Socialist Movement. In addition to ordering officers to support the Nazi Party, Durnitz also made them salute Hitler. The Hitler salute was brought to the Navy by Durnitz, who wanted, quote, the German salute to be introduced into the armed forces as a token of their unbreakable faith to the Fuhrer and the closest union between the armed forces and the party, 2878 PS. This statement specifically highlights the goals of unionizing the armed forces in the Nazi Party. Additionally, by publicizing the salute, Durnitz is officially becoming a political figure that supports the Nazis and not just a mere naval officer. Overall, Durnitz was a Nazi political figure that abused his power to spread their ideology. As a supporter and public figure for the Nazi Party, Durnitz played a key role in multiple attacks on enemy countries. One of these attacks was against Poland, where Durnitz violated the military and land restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles by blatantly helping plot the takeover of Poland. His knowledge of the specific plans for the takeover of Poland represent his big role in deciding upon these goals. Durnitz helped plot the occupation, making him individually responsible for violating the Treaty of Versailles and the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Durnitz also helped plot the invasions of Denmark and Norway. He helped by writing letters on the rapid surprise landing of troops in Norway, as well as a similar occupation of Denmark, C-151. His letters illustrate his role as a key leader of these occupations, which defied the Treaty of Versailles and the Kellogg-Briand Pact. In addition to helping plan occupations of enemy countries, Durnitz also was the leader of the U-Boat Program. The U-Boat Program created submarines called U-Boats that caused mass destruction by destroying over 3 million tons of enemy ships in the span of only a single year. To put this in perspective, the U.S. Navy destroyed 4.8 million tons in the span of the entire 6-year war. These staggering numbers demonstrate why Hitler found increasing U-boat warfare, quote, his most important task, D-423. This demonstrates the importance of the program, which makes Durnitz a top asset. This should be noted by justices throughout the case so that they always remember that Durnitz had the power to make his own choices and still decided to let prisoners of war be murdered. One way he did this was by not addressing the commando order, which ordered for prisoners of war to be executed, which is a war crime. On October 18, 1942, the commando order was sent to many people, including Durnitz. It ordered that for all enemies on so-called commando missions in Europe or Africa charged by German troops, even if they are all to appear as soldiers in uniform or demolition troops, whether armed or unarmed, in battle or in flight, are to be slaughtered to the last man. C-179. Here, the order is asking men to murder prisoners of war, which is a direct violation of numerous international treaties. By having full knowledge of this order, Durnitz is, in addition to being a bystander, also illustrating to all the men under his authority that this is the right action to take. Durnitz helped train numerous U-boat officers who believed that Durnitz was, quote, a leader and inspiration to all the forces under him, making his non-statement about the commando order as important as a public agreement. 1463 PS. It is important to note that Dönitz possessed a lot of power in Germany and could have defied the order with little consequence. Overall, his non-engagement with the statement allowed Navy captains to interpret the command order in different ways, which led to an incident in Norway between a U-boat and commando unit. In the summer of 1943, in northern Norway, an enemy sabotage unit was engaged and destroyed by a U-boat. The U-boat took prisoners and had their naval officer interrogate them. They were later turned over to the SD, who murdered them, just like the commando order instructed. Since this was a matter of the Navy, there's a high likelihood that Dönitz would have known about this and helped the officers accomplish the murder of enemy soldiers. Under Dönitz's leadership, soldiers unanimously agreed that they, quote, never felt, and that was said many times in mess halls and on enemy ships, that they had to make any of their difficult decisions alone. Tiny, brief answers followed rendered radio reports, proving that the chief, day and night, was monitoring painstakingly the reports, just as if he was with them as he stood on the bridge beside them. 1463 PS. This statement proves that Dönitz was devoted to his job and was constantly overseeing all U-boat interactions. Thus, it is difficult to believe that Dönitz did not instruct or oversee the encounter. Dönitz violated the London Treaty of 1930, which Germany agreed to in 1936, by requesting for U-boats to destroy merchant ships with an intent to murder all passengers on them. Additionally, he also violated the German prize ordinance created by the very country he was fighting for. He did not follow these guidelines by, quote, demanding that we Nazis should from now on carry on total warfare against enemy ship and crew. This meant, so as far as possible, no seaman from a sunken ship was to get home anymore. B566. This speech given to U-boat officers highlights Dönitz's goals to obliterate not only enemy ships, but any non-German vessels, with an ultimate goal to kill all passengers. An officer listening to Dönitz when he gave these commands stated that, quote, this mode of warfare was for me, as for most of my comrades, completely new. D566. Here, the idea of these orders being completely new highlights the fact that Dönitz was likely to have helped create these rules himself and should be held accountable for whatever these orders would entail. The soldiers were also forced to follow these orders because if they were not faithful, Dönitz promised to hang them. In a speech given, Dönitz claimed that any soldiers who is not faithful to Navy will be hanged, demonstrating how not following orders would cost a life. D650. On September 12, 1942, an English boat by the name of Laconia was sunk by a U-boat, which left many survivors trying to stay afloat. This caused Dönitz, who had been closely monitoring the altercation, to order to take all measures with appropriate ruthlessness, including discontinuance of all rescue activities. Blue Series, Chapter 13, pages 286 and 287. This order caused the U-boat to stop rescuing soldiers, leaving many to die. In the end of the 1800s, Italians on board the Laconia, only 450 survived. In a separate order, Dönitz also asked a U-boat that was towing several lifeboats to, quote, cast off these boats, which not only would be killing innocent civilians, but also murdering people they already rescued as prisoners of war. This order likely led to other similar cases, including when another captain of a U-boat ruthlessly machine gunned defenseless sailors, D647. Overall, both scenarios represent a common theme of U-boats going out of their way to murder prisoners of war. These events violate the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention by ordering U-boats to eliminate all passengers on ships not killed by the initial shipwreck caused by a torpedo. Dönitz violated the Geneva Convention on numerous occasions by not only murdering prisoners of war, but also enslaving them. At a conference, Dönitz stated that, quote, 12,000 concentration camp prisoners will be employed in the shipyards as additional labor. See 195. This statement not only highlights his knowledge of the concentration camps, but his willingness to use prisoners as slaves. This violates the Geneva Convention by mistreating prisoners of war. However, when Hitler asked for his opinion on the country officially denouncing the Geneva Convention, he refused to do so. He decided that, quote, it would be better to carry out the measures considered necessary without announcement and in any case to save face with the outer world. See 158. Here, the measures talked about represent the decisions that will have to be made in the future that may contradict the Geneva Convention, which illustrates an acceptance that this will happen under his supervision. See 158. In the meeting, it is important to note that Dönitz was simply asked for his opinion and therefore not under any pressure to say anything besides his own views. Dönitz's words represent his true ideals and his willingness to contradict a key treaty. In addition to violating the Geneva Convention, Durrance also violated the Treaty of Mutual Guarantee and the Locarno Pact, which both stated that France and Germany would never attack each other. He violated these treaties by signing a document that, quote, ordered the sinking without warning by U-boats of all ships in those waters near the enemy coast, C-21. This caused many French boats to be destroyed by U-boats on multiple occasions. In addition to ordering the destruction of specific ships, Durrance added in a separate statement that, quote, all U-boats in the English Channel have received instructions to attack all vessels sailing without light, C-191. The English Channel goes directly next to France, which demonstrates that Durrance was willing to destroy French ships. By breaking this treaty, Durrance is illustrating his willingness to break larger and more important laws later in the war. On April 11, 1942, Durrance ordered the continuation of the war by asking his naval officers to, quote, clearly and unambiguously follow the path of military duty, whatever may happen, D-650. Here, the use of may happen illustrates Durrance's understanding of the dangers in battle, which he wants his soldiers to endure. This seems like an ordinary order that all commanding officers would ask of their soldiers. But when Germany is destined to lose, it is more of a death sentence. Durrance even admitted that the war was a fateful struggle, representing his own understanding that Germany was in no place to win, D-650. Although for a typical soldier, surrendering would mean death, Durrance would likely not be majorly affected if he decided to order the discontinuance of fighting, since he held such a high position. This was especially the case when he got appointed as the head of Germany following Hitler's death, due to his position of power that kept him in charge of the entire country. Durrance would have been able to order the immediate surrender of Germany as soon as he became leader. However, he did not officially surrender until 8 days after his appointment as the head of state. This caused an unequivocal amount of havoc against enemy nations that could have been avoided by a simple public statement of surrender. In conclusion, Durrance fought for the Nazi Party by leading his U-boats to the murder and enslavement of prisoners of war on multiple occasions. As head of the program, he also led the destruction of merchant ships, killing neutral parties not fighting in the war. Additionally, he also led occupations of Denmark, Norway, and Poland, where he broke the Treaty of Versailles as well as the Kellogg Pact. Justices, I hope you come to realize that Durrance should be convicted of war crimes, conspiracy, and crimes against peace. Thank you.
We will now hear the defense's opening statement on behalf of Mr. Durrance. Please approach the stand.
In the case of IMT versus Karl Durrance, it is clear that Mr. Durrance is not guilty. He has been framed and accused of false crimes by the prosecution put together by the Allied countries. Mr. Durrance acted within his position in the German Navy throughout the war with his main goal of protecting and ensuring the safety of the German citizens. He held himself to the highest standards and worked to ensure the continued unity and prosperity of Germany, protecting his countries from enemies near and across oceans. When he believed Poland was a threat to the German people, he acted in a necessary manner to protect Germany. He did this by helping plan Operation Fallweiss, as stated in C-126. Poland's present attitude necessitates military preparations being made over and above the protection of the eastern frontiers. This shows that Durrance was simply responding to his duty as a naval officer by preparing to defend his country. He maintained his standards throughout the war, only acting when he needed to and ensuring the prosperity of his people. He also never resorted to extreme violence against the enemy unless necessary. As stated in C-191, in practice, there is no opportunity for attacking at night, as the U-boat cannot identify a target which is a shadow in a way that entirely obviates mistakes being made. If a political situation is such that even possible mistakes must be ruled out, U-boats must be forbidden to make any attacks at night, in waters where French and English naval forces or merchant ships may be situated. He realized the possibility of a mistake and therefore refused to attack at night, only attacking during the day where he can make sure to protect his German forces to the best of his ability and stop any unnecessary violence. Durrance was especially focused on the well-being of his troops and the actions they took to rescue members of enemy shipwrecks, as it was his obligation as a U-boat commander and later admiral to protect those under him. When possible, he did his utmost to ensure the survival of enemy troops, as there are multiple reports of troops stating how they rescued enemy shipwreck survivors. One soldier in Dönitz 13 stated, "They got from us additional cigarettes and some alcohol and were dismissed with course instruction." In the second case, the torpedo ship had to be sunk with artillery. The artillery shelling was explicitly planned so that the distant lifeboats were not threatened. Another soldier states that he had aided captured enemies to the best of ability and safety. At 13:95 a.m., taken aboard, taken prisoner, I had provided with fresh provisions and allowed to continue drifting. They could have easily been picked up by an airboat in good weather and heavy air traffic. These two statements from soldiers in different situations show that when safe, soldiers under Dönitz were under orders to help those from enemy shipwrecks. Furthermore, Dönitz rebuked Hitler when it came to attacking survivors of shipwrecks, as Rader said of Dönitz in Dönitz 17. Admiral Dönitz unequivocally rejected any action against the survivors of the ship's crew. He argued that the fight against enemy occupation could only result in the torpedoes being completed and the ships being destroyed by previous torpedo hits. This statement shows how Dönitz refused to continue attacking enemy ships after their sinking, as long as his troops were safe. This trial wrongfully assumes and accuses Dönitz of wanting to attack and hurt those of other countries without just cause. In fact, Dönitz was simply executing the same procedures used by ally and enemy countries. In Dönitz 100, when U.S. Admiral Nimitz is asked, "Did the USA, in her sea warfare against Japan, announce certain waters to be areas of operation, blockade, danger, restriction, warning, or the like?" he responded, "Yes. For the purpose of command of operations against Japan, the Pacific Ocean areas were declared a theater of operations." And he was also asked, if yes, was it customary in such areas for submarines to attack merchantmen without warning, with the exception of her own and those of her allies? To which he responded, yes. Therefore, as you can see, Dönitz followed the same common practices as Admiral Nimitz, as he also followed a similar practice when Germany created a similar blockade to defend their country, as stated in D641B. The effect of the German total blockade is to prohibit neutral ships from entering an enormous stretch of sea around Britain upon having pain of their ships sunk. This statement clearly shows that Dönitz was simply following practices used by multiple countries to protect Germany from its enemies. As I have stated earlier, it is clear that his whole trial is set up to frame an innocent man for false crimes. Beyond the earlier stated reasons, I call upon the justices to see the problem with the prosecution of an innocent man. A person who simply wanted to continue to allow his country to prosper with unity and growth. In a speech to a group of commander-in-chiefs of Germany, Dönitz stated in document D640 that, as officers, we have the obligation to be the guardians of this unity of our people. Every disunity would also affect our troops. He knew that his duty was to protect his people, and every disunity would have a negative effect on Germany. Therefore, when the people of Germany elected the National Socialist Party and threw their weight behind them, Dönitz worked with the party as they were the choice of the people. He realized that the will of the party elected was also the will of the people, and that by working with the leaders of Germany who were part of the National Socialist Party, he was working with those who had the support of the German people. Therefore, he realized that by working with those the people elected, he helped support the unity of Germany and therefore further protected the common people of Germany. Dönitz gave his all for the German people until he was forced to surrender. He continued the war even as it looked as if the German people were losing because, as he states in D651, the occupation of the whole of Germany further means the conscription of German people throughout Germany for work, particularly in Russia, but also in other enemy countries. Therefore, he fought against surrender until he knew Germany was absolutely defeated, as he had an obligation to protect the German people from conscription by other countries as the head of state. He always had the German people's interests at the front of his mind and was focused on fulfilling his duty towards them. If he had surrendered immediately after being named head of state, it was probable that the citizens of the German nation would have been immediately put into a situation in which they would have been taken advantage of and forced to work against their will. For all the reasons stated above and the reasons that will be brought before you in the next hour, You justices who proceed above this trial will and possibly already have realized this trial is a farce set up around the prosecution of a man who has been falsely accused of crimes. In accordance with a fair trial, the justices present must come to the obvious conclusion that without a doubt, the man brought before you, Mr. Durnitz, is innocent of all crimes. Thank you.
We will now hear from Carl Durnitz himself.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the court. My name is Karl Durnitz. I was the Admiral of the German Navy and the latest head of state. I plead not guilty on the counts of crimes against the peace, war crimes, and conspiracy. I was born in Grinner, Germany, a kingdom of Prussia, on September 16th of 1891. Years ago, I discovered my passion and knowledge for submarines and put it to use after I graduated from submarine school. I am here today because I am falsely accused of crimes against the peace, war crimes, and conspiracy. I started my naval career in 1910 and was enlisted in Kaiserliche Marine. After many promotions, served as a submarine commander during both world wars. After reinventing the successful idea of the Rusaltic, I led the U-boat fleet that protected Germany throughout the wars. I crafted smaller submarines that helped protect and defend my crew and country from attack. I ultimately became Admiral of the Navy, rewarded for my devotion to the country. After the loss of World War II, Germany's once glorious atmosphere started to fall to pieces. I couldn't stand to see Germany in such a state, so I ordered that Germany sign the surrender documents. I did my best to stall the surrender documents on the behalf of Germany after the information of possible enslavement for the German citizens. I'm accused of crimes against the peace. However, I followed the instructions and maintained within every contract and treaty's rules. The Treaty of Versailles prohibited any and all of Germany's submarines, which should not have been allowed to begin. I commanded the successful U-boat fleet that attacked enemy ships with a quick escape route for my crew members. I was in charge of protecting Germany, and there was no better way to do that other than staying one step ahead of other countries. Therefore, I had to ensure that Germany had proper defensive mechanisms in the case of an aggressive attack from an enemy country. The submarine fleet that I led was ordered solely before the war, solely to prepare and perfect the strategies for upcoming battles. As it comes to breaking the law, I'm accused of manufacturing the German U-boats contrary to the rules of the Treaty of Versailles. It is a common misconception that the U-boats were crafted before the war. However, they were under contract and not construction. The U-boats would be ready to use when prompted, rather than already built. I put the U-boats under contract in case of an emergency. My crew and boats would be ready to defend themselves. Along with crimes against the peace, I am wrongly accused of war crimes. During any war, an admiral's main focus should be the well-being of their country's sailors. As the Navy's leader, I was put in a position to protect my sailors and not any other country. There was minimal space inside the U-boat, and I was not going to make room for a foreign country's man over my own. My crew was instructed to rescue survivors to the best of their abilities without endangering themselves. After being informed that an enemy's man could possibly put my troops in danger, I steered away from the idea of rescuing survivors of some sunken ships. Going into any war, one is prepared to fight off any and all enemies, and that is what I instructed my crew to do. As it comes to being charged with conspiracy, I had no prior knowledge of the mass exterminations taking place throughout the mainland of Germany. I stand in front of you today accused of defending my country. I put my country before everything, and regardless of the outcome of this trial, I will continue to fight for what I believe is right. Thank you for having me.
We will now begin direct examination. Defense will begin on your behalf.
Could you please state your name and most prominent former positions in Germany?
My name is Karl Durnitz. I was the former Admiral of the Navy and the latest head of state, Germany.
What were your prime objectives as a member of the German Navy?
My prime obligation was to protect the German citizens while allowing them to prosper and succeed.
Were you obligated to create a stronger Navy for Germany?
Yes, I felt that if I created a stronger Germany, it would be easier to protect the citizens and the country itself.
In the case that you believe the country was a threat to Germany, how would you react?
I would react with taking any measures necessary in order to protect my country, which was my top priority at the time.
Did you have reason to believe that Poland had provided the threat to Germany?
Yes, I had reason to believe that because there were documents and information that supposed that Poland was a threat to Germany at the time, so I reacted in a way to fight back for my country.
I have a statement from a pretrial interrogation compiled into Blue Series Volume 13, page 301, in which you stated, I never received from the viewer an order which in any way violated the ethics of war. Neither I nor anyone in the Navy, and this is my conviction, knew anything about the mass extermination of people. Were you given precise information by the actions taken by the German government in concentration camps?
No, I was not.
When asked in Dönitz 100, was it customary in such areas for submarines to attack merchantmen without warning, with the exception of her own and those of her allies? Admiral Nimitz of the US states yes. Were the actions your troops used similar to the orders given to those under Admiral Nimitz's command?
Yes, I would say that the tactics I used were very similar to Admiral Nimitz and were also very common within every other country that they used throughout wars.
I have a statement from one of your soldiers in Dönitz 13 stating, they got from us additional cigarettes and some alcohol and were dismissed with course instruction in regards to the survivors of enemy shipwrecks. Does this statement further show how your troops were under orders to rescue survivors?
Yes, I instructed my crew to provide aid and help with to survivors of sunken ships. However, if I thought in any way that the survivors could could endanger my troops, I would instruct them not to aid.
In one statement in a pretrial interrogation, later compiled into volume 13, page 236 of the Blue Series, you said that the prosecution wrongly concluded that I had prohibited the rescue of Englishmen. That I did not prohibit it can be seen from the fact that I did not raise objections. There are many reports speaking of the rescue of Englishmen. What does this report show about the accusations against you?
I would say that the accusations are damaging my image because I instructed my crew to provide aid for the Englishmen and I am falsely accused of not instructing them to.
So you would say these accusations were false?
Yes, I would say the accusations are false.
Did you delay surrendering to the Allies to protect the German people?
Yes, after hearing news that an immediate surrender might conclude that the German citizens would be enslaved, I held off and stalled for as long as I could.
How did your statement in document D650, in which you stated, the occupation of the whole of Germany further means the conscription of German people throughout Germany for work particularly in Russia, but also in other enemy countries, plan to your decision of surrendering later?
I wanted to ensure that Germany's defeat would be ensured after holding off for as long as I could, and I wanted to protect the German citizens, which was my top priority. So I held off for as long as I could in case of possible enslavement.
Thank you.
We will now begin cross-examination. Prosecution will begin on your behalf.
Are you a supporter of the Nazi Party?
It depends.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Did you ask your soldiers to support the party? This is a yes or no question.
Yes.
Is it true that as Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, you asked for the Hitler sloop to be introduced to the Army?
I don't recall.
And is it also true that is it true that you threatened to hang your officers if they were not faithful to Germany?
I don't recall.
Justices, can you please ask the defendant to answer my question?
Please answer the question, Mr. Chair.
Seems as if I did. Yes.
Were you a leader in the occupation of Poland?
Yes.
Before this occupation of Poland, did you have any knowledge of Poland violently attacking Germany?
Yes, I had reason to believe that they were provided.
But did they violently attack Germany? Yes or no?
No.
So Germany initiated the violence with the occupation of Poland,
After threats.
but they initiated the first violence.
Yes, they
Okay.
took a step.
As head of the U-boat program, which you had full control over, did you have 80 U-boats under construction?
Sorry,
80 U-boats under construction.
under contract, not construction.
That is not true. I want you to read this statement from 3150 PS, where it asks, you want to read it, or put this last two lines.
Contract. This confirms that 80 U-boats were in contract.
You said, they asked, yes, under construction or under contract, and it said it may be. So here, they are agreeing that it may be
It
that
says
the
the
U-boat.
answer is under contract.
It asks, yes, under the construction or under contract. It says it may be yes.
Under contract.
It does not say under contract.
Very close.
That is from 3150 PS. Did you order that all U-boats in the English Channel have the right to attack all vessels sailing without light?
Could you repeat the question?
Did you order that all U-boats in the English Channel have the right to attack all vessels sailing without light?
Yes.
Did you order your people to save passengers? from
Yeah. Yes, to the best of their abilities, without endangering themselves. I did.
Okay, so let me read an excerpt from D642. Do not pick up any survivors and take them with you. Do not worry about the merchant ship's boats, whether conditions and distance from land to play no part. Have a care only for your own ship and strive to only attain your next success as soon as possible. We must be harsh in this war. The enemy began the war in order to destroy us, so nothing else matters. D642. As leader of Germany, did you allow the military to continue fighting for 7 days after your appointment? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you understand that this would cause several military officers to likely perish in this manner?
Yes.
Did you order soldiers in the Laconia altercation to take all measures with appropriate ruthlessness, including discontinuance of all rescue activities?
Is there evidence?
Yes, Blue Series, Chapter 13, pages 286 to 287.
Yes, I did.
Is it also true that these actions led to the deaths of over 1,300 passengers of the Laconia?
Yes.
That's all my questions.
The tribunal will now ask some questions. Defendant, please approach the stand. Can you elaborate on your intent for the creation of the U-boats?
Yes, so I wanted Germany to have the best vessels that they could. So I knew that with the submarine, it would be the underwater, going underwater, would be more discreet, and also with the torpedoing. I believed that putting them under contract and not construction was also not contrary to any other treaty. And also, what I wanted to do with the U-boats was make them smaller, so they're easier to.
You withheld a policy that made it impossible for those in the military to be non-political. Can you elaborate on why you did this?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, you withheld a policy that made it impossible for those in the military to be non-political. Can you elaborate on why you did this?
Well, I would say that making my military non-political would make it easier for me and my group. And as far as going back to the rest of Germany was different because of
And your attorney claimed that you had a real reason to expect Poland to attack your country, and you mentioned documents that explain this. Can you elaborate on what documents these were?
I don't know the exact documents, but I know there were documents that provided that gave information on Poland providing threats. So that's why me and my country invaded Poland as taking the responsible measures.
Do you have any questions? Okay, can prosecution please approach the stand?
If you could really quickly just refer back to your evidence packet, and could you provide the justices with the date of when you claim that the U-boats were under construction?
This piece of evidence was from an interrogation on November 3rd, 1945.
That's the date of the interrogation, or the date that the U-boats were.
That is the date of the interrogation where they asked him about this, the U-boats.
Okay, you may be seated.
We will now hear prosecution's closing statement. Please approach the stand.
Throughout this trial, I have continuously argued why Karl Dönitz should be charged with war crimes, conspiracy, and crimes against peace. With his murdering of prisoners of war, occupations of enemy countries, bleeding of the U-boat program, and the murdering of his own people, the defendant has caused serious damage. The defense has continuously stated that Dönitz has simply followed through with these horrific crimes because he wanted to defend his country. But where do we draw the line? Where do we say that enough is enough and that these crimes are a cause of Dönitz's personal agenda and not just his country's? Dönitz went out of his way to support the Nazi Party, which illustrates that he did more than just what was needed to keep his country safe. Dönitz did not have to spread Nazi propaganda, nor did he have to order the continuation of a lost war. But he did these actions not out of loyalty to his country, but his personal beliefs. Additionally, these orders did not cause the death of a few unlucky civilians, but the annihilation of entire populations. To once again reiterate my argument, a soldier's role is to simply keep his country protected and not to go out of his way to annihilate neutral parties in war. So I ask myself, how can leaving over 1,300 people to die be accepted? How can towing a lifeboat full of defenseless prisoners of war and then leaving them be in the middle of the ocean to die be accepted? War causes chaos, but this chaos should not justify leaving innocent civilians to die. In conclusion, due to Dönitz's horrific actions, he should be found guilty on conspiracy, war crimes, and crimes against peace. Thank you.
We will now hear defense's closing statement. Please approach the stand.
As the justices and people present have witnessed this case for the past hour, I'm sure that by now you have all come to the conclusion that an innocent man is being prosecuted. He is being wrongfully charged with crimes against peace, conspiracy, and war crimes. Mr. Dönitz simply worked to protect his country and the German citizens throughout the war, as was his priority. What you have witnessed today further suspects is I, along with Mr. Dönitz, have proved all of these accusations false. As for war crimes, you have seen that Mr. Dönitz was following the common practices used by multiple countries, including the US, an enemy of Germany, when it came to attacking enemy vessels. He also maintained the obligation he owed to his troops, making sure that they were in a safe position when rescuing enemy troops. Furthermore, as you have seen, the prosecution has wrongfully accused Mr. Dönitz of allowing certain enemy soldiers to die when they were in fact rescued, as well as falsely saying earlier in his opening statement that Mr. Dönitz abandoned Italian soldiers to die, when in fact he had his soldiers pull out of concern for their safety as is stated in evidence found in Blue Series Volume 13, page 283. My concern at the time was expressed in a message to the submarines radioed 4 times. Detailed boats to take over only so many as to remain fully able to die. Mr. Dönitz did not commit war crimes, but was in fact simply prioritizing the survival of those he was tasked to protect. As for the charges against Dönitz regarding crimes against peace, Mr. Dönitz did not take any unnecessary actions against other countries. As I have already proven, Mr. Dönitz had documents detailing the threat Poland provided, as I provided in my opening statement, and therefore had to prepare to defend Germany, as his duty was to protect German citizens from threats. These were all threats Mr. Dönitz needed to protect the German citizens from, threats that he, as Admiral of the Navy and later head of state, had an obligation to protect the German citizens from. As Mr. Dönitz had reason to believe that the German citizens would be enslaved if he immediately surrendered after his promotion to head of state, he did not surrender until absolutely necessary, thereby protecting the German citizens. Finally, as for conspiracy, all the actions Mr. Dönitz planned were to protect those he was obligated to protect. I have already proven that Mr. Dönitz had no influence on the concentration camps and had no idea that the Jews were being exterminated in camps around Germany. Therefore, Mr. Dönitz cannot be connected to the charge of conspiracy. I would also like to point the judges towards the question the prosecution has asked in my defendants. Almost every single question asked by the prosecution was of a yes or no nature. As I have proved that the prosecution has twisted and falsified statements, it is imperative that the justices realize that the questions asked of the defendant do not show the full story in many of Mr. Dönitz's actions. As you can see from the evidence that I have presented throughout this trial and what I have just stated, it is clear that Mr. Dönitz is not guilty of any of the charges being leveled against him by the prosecution. Thank you.
Panel 1 will now take time to deliberate on the evidence and statements just presented, while panel 2 hears the next case after a short break. Thank you.
Rise.